Good night. Ancient Heart here. Doing a live stream again. I think I'll be doing many more of them. This one I think is so important because, MGTOW and Red Pill and other men's rights movements don't just get slammed by women, they get slammed by all too many men. And I don't understand. First of all, I think anybody has the right to make their own decision in their own life for what their choices are going to be and what those choices are based on. People's own experience. Again, the human context of experience that matters more than anything else, matters more than how people judge or belittle. And I don't think there's anything about the MGTOW movement or the Red Pill movement or men's rights that does go beyond cluster B, of course, but I don't think there's anything. It's not a divide and conquer. People have the right to make their own choices, and that includes men. And so, something I know from working with many, many, many men, I don't know, endless, countless men over the last 30 years, some men, not all, that are MGTOW men or red pill men or in other men's rights movements or, living a lifestyle according to their own human experience, which has been very traumatizing, or maybe there's a better word, but traumatizing with cluster B women. And maybe I wouldn't know what the right word is to put in there with women in general. But it's so important to recognize. So male clients for years have been teaching me more and more about this, more and more about their experiences as men of all ages, but predominantly millennial, and I guess a generation upcoming below them. They're going through an entirely different thing, I think, than older men have been through. But that's not to compare or say that a man has to be a certain age to be experiencing what men are really talking about. That is, I think, very founded and very grounded and very reasonable. So I know that I've had clients with, an X with cluster B, be that BPD or NPD, that definitely will say and describe themselves as MGTOW men or red pill men, but they mean staying away and going their own way from cluster B women. But that's not all men. Some men are just like, that's it. They don't want to be in relationships with women. They don't want to get married. They don't want to subject themselves to all of the things, whether it's a cluster B woman or not, that are really kind of working against men today and have been for probably a lot longer than I was aware of. And I just want to say, I I don't know anymore, was um, a feminist, but I was a child at the time. So what was it, the second wave of feminism in the 60s? Well, that made a little more sense to me, but I was a kid. So I would learn about it later because I'm late stage baby boomer. So the thing is, I don't think that women, obviously women have had issues over time, but what I don't understand about that is, what does that have to do with what's really happening in the world today? Yes, there are men who abuse women, but there are women who abuse and traumatize men. And it seems like, this fifth wave of feminism, which I can't get on board with at all, let alone necessarily the third wave. The fourth wave seemed to be a little bit of a different iteration, but the point is, what is a man supposed to do in culture in general when still, as if not always, but still largely, courts and societal institutions, which are all breaking down anyways, in this postmodernist reality that we live in? It's a deconstructive kind of era or time, but where are men's rights? And this is what so many of my clients, I mean, when they've been with a cluster B woman or still are, it brings a whole new awareness to a lot of men. But that's not the whole issue for a lot of men. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I can say what it is for all men. I'm not sounding PC. Well, you know what? sounding PC, how does that serve anybody? When there are a lot of people that are hurting, whether it's a man or a woman in that regard. So I just think what's really un-PC is the fifth wave of feminism, which is always talking like, or screaming more to the point like, that men are a monolithic group that are all abusers and women this, that, and the other thing. It's just not true. And men aren't a monolithic group either. But I don't understand because I don't, so the first comment that I get is I'm not sounding PC. Well, why would I want to be? This is such an issue that is decimating so many people's lives, mostly men these days. Courts do not, I mean, it's rare when men in any situation, let alone with a cluster B woman, a borderline or narcissist, or even a psychopathic woman, if there is such a quote diagnosis unquote to that with women, I don't know what they're doing with that. But there's just so much that is, there's no equity in it. The idea that, and I'm not here to say that women aren't abused by some men, they absolutely are, and that is an issue, but many men are very abused by women, and that's not being talked about enough. And then there's, I've encountered different things online, and of course it's not always women that are saying, well, MGTOW men or red pill men are just blaming women, and oh, like they need to grow up and all this stuff, when there's real issues there. So I think it's really important to acknowledge, and I just know because I work with so many clients, many of them are MGTOW or red pill because of cluster B women. And so that might not extend to all women for them, but many it extends to all women for different reasons. And why shouldn't men be as free as women to make their own choices, to live the kind of life that they want to live? So it doesn't even take a cluster B relationship for women to have this, largely, not always, but to have this dominating sort of really head start in court when there's any relationship breakup for any reason. It can be within cluster B or could be not. And the man, the parental alienation is a huge issue for men, and being lied to that a child is theirs when the child isn't theirs, etc., and all kinds of other atrocities. And men really still to this day, unless they're really wealthy and they get really lucky in a certain jurisdiction with a certain court with a certain type of judge, they're gonna oftentimes, more often than not, lose, and especially to cluster B women. And I think it just needs to be said. And I'm passionate about this because, never mind I'm a woman, I work with so many men whose lives, they're just decimated and they're traumatized and they're experiencing parental alienation. And yeah, it's often to do with cluster B women in the area that I work in predominantly, but not only. But it doesn't have to be that. So, and I think too that I don't think it's really appropriate to say, but to a degree, right? I mean, like, men should have the same rights as women. And then, of course, women can say, well, women don't have the same rights as men. But I think a lot has really shifted. And when I saw the Red Pill documentary, I mean, I did. I bawled. I couldn't believe it. It's like, and it was a client of mine that woke me up to that, and a client of mine that was going through all of this, like not just one, but one in particular I'm remembering, because this man actually went through an incredible battle, through years and years. So his children were young once, and by the time he got through all this court struggle and battling, and it was in the province I live in, that he actually won, which is very rare. But by that time the damage was done, and some reparation was happening, but the damage was done between him and his children. And the courts and society just kept believing this woman. And it doesn't make much more sense than the other side. And you said that the video explains why men should support PC culture. Well, I guess you're obviously a man who doesn't believe in MGTOW, red pill, or men's rights. I mean, there's a lot of men out there who have different opinions, right? I'm not sure where you're coming from with that. So But I think that, as much as there's feminism, there's also something called menism. And what's wrong with that? It's a term that's used to describe various groups, but it includes the men's rights movement. And it is talking about the challenge of social issues facing men. And in the Red Pill documentary, I could not believe that, well, a lot of it, but it's true what's happening out there for men, and men being abused by women, and often they're cluster B women, but they're not always. And the thing is that one woman in the because these are younger women now today, right? In fifth wave feminism, which I think just looks like lunacy to me, because what rights don't they have, and the idea that, yeah, okay, so like lots of women have been abused. I was abused in my childhood. I was sexually abused. I had a dark triad father, but I healed all that. And does one man, like that man in my life, my father, does he equal all men? No, he doesn't. And so this fifth wave of feminism, they, like, that woman in the movie was yelling, swearing, screaming, disrespectful, not willing to listen to anyone else. I'm not saying every woman that's in fifth wave feminism would be like that, but the point is, I don't understand as a woman what they're yelling and screaming about in that age group. And then it's like, what's happening on university campuses? What's been happening for the last 10 to 15 years with all this radicalization? And it leaves men, if you ever have a problem with a woman, or a cluster B woman more specifically, it leaves men out in the cold. And most courts and most divorce proceedings and most things are going to be very unjust for the man. I'm not saying there isn't injustice for women too. Hi, Rab. I haven't seen the Red Pill documentary, but I will have to watch it for sure. Well, yes, and it depends on each man's experience, right? Because, like, not all men are the same, and not all women are the same. But, there are themes that run through cluster B women for sure. But, I've had clients that, like I said, there's differences in some MGTOW men versus some MGTOW men that have told me they are MGTOW in the sense of going their own way, wanting to make sure they never again get with another cluster B woman. And for some men, it's just a choice of lifestyle that they just don't want to deal with. I don't think they're blaming women. I think they're really talking about a lot of ills in society. And yeah, I'm 62 years old now. Do you think when I was 20 or when I was 14 or like when I was abused by my father, do you think growing up through that process of healing and recovery that I ever thought I'd be a staunch supporter of men's rights over feminine? No, I never thought that. But it's real, because that one woman was just a good representation in the Red Pill documentary, but the yelling and the screaming and the swearing, that young lady, who might be much older now, I don't know when the documentary was made, but women today in fifth wave radical feminism need to shake their heads and wake the hell up, because those battles that they're trying to increase and take more and more away from men, to the point where they're dehumanizing men, they need to, like, woady their hoe there, and realize that what they really need is already out there for them. I don't understand what they think they deserve more of. And the legal system and the court system around the world, in more cases than not, fails man after man after man after man, especially when they are getting divorced from, have a family with a cluster B woman. Oh, yeah, this notion, this age old notion that children are just better off with their mother. Well, not if there's something going really wrong with that mother, even if it's not cluster B, but if they're borderline untreated, or if they're narcissistic or beyond, or they have a plethora of things going on and they're just really not mentally well, then what society has done, not only, not helping men alienated from their own children, men that really care about their children, men that stay in these god awful relationships, being traumatized for extra years just to see their kids make it to 18, trying to be a force in their lives to protect their mental health. And society and the courts still see or think, largely, not all, but more often than not, that the women should still have the children, or everything should be 50-50. It's absolutely asinine, especially when a woman is untreated cluster B. And a man, okay, he might be codependent, but he's basically a lot healthier. He's got some stable sense of self, and he can provide for his children, and he can take care of his children. And this idea, what are we saying? If I'm not being politically correct, what the hell does that matter in all of this? Because what would that mean? Would that mean that men can't parent their children? That men don't love their children? That men aren't involved and committed to their children? Of course, I'm not saying all men, right? But like, Anyway, um, I don't even know where you're coming from, Marcus. Oh, the Red Pill documentary. Okay, well, I don't know where you're coming from with your comments at all. Like, whether you're just against this or whether you're, I have no idea. Um, yes, it will be. I wish I knew how to say your name correctly. Sitai? I don't know if I'm saying that right. I'm sorry if I'm not. So this idea of, I mean, I don't think we ever get to achieve equality, but what's happening, the radicalization of feminism today. I mean, what was it, just a couple years ago or so? Maybe three, I don't know, or longer, somewhere in that region where, the Gillette, razor company, etc., had the toxic masculinity ads. Well, man, I mean, what about fifth wave feminism and the fact that it's just straight up toxic femininity? Say T. Is that better? Sorry if I'm still not getting that right. So anyway, I think this is really important because there's well, a lot of places online that will, and sometimes it is men. And one thing I know a lot of men tell me is, they don't have any men in their life. They have men in their life, but they don't have any men in their life that wants to hear, that want to hear or can hear about their feelings or about their pain or about the hurt and the trauma, especially with cluster B women and parental alienation and all this legal court battle stuff that, I mean, it's just, there's nothing in this postmodern world that I don't understand. Like, there's always going to be individual experiences of inequity, individual experiences of difficulty when men and women are relating. But I mean, some men and women are relating, but it doesn't have to be this big divide and conquer of like, and yet, I think in fourth wave feminism, it was more they were trying to forward the notion of equality. Well, equality is a lovely concept, but philosophically speaking, how do we apply, equality to actuality? Because it doesn't really translate into actuality. So I think we have to try to empower those who need empowerment in any moment of time, which these days is often men more than women. I don't know. Maybe there's just more cluster B women, but I'm not limiting it to cluster B. Oh, okay, good. Well, that's interesting, Marcus, because when I looked up the history of MGTOW, it was, they kind of like attributed it to two men starting it, but then they were like, it was a little bit like they didn't have clear sort of history of it, I suppose one could say. But the thing is that, like, what's the opposite of feminism? Well, it's masculinism, and it can vary, but the advocacy of rights or needs of men and boys, the adherence to or promotion of attributes, opinions and values and attitudes, etc., that are regarded as typical of men and boys. Well, I think typical is not a good way to put it because there's sameness in some aspects of being a woman versus being a man, but then there's so many individual differences, like I'm always talking about with people with BPD, for example, or let's just stick with women with BPD right now, that some are severely impacted, some are comorbid with NPD, many aren't, but if they don't seek treatment, I personally think they shouldn't have kids. But I'm not saying that every mother with BPD is a horrible mother, but most of them ruin their children's mental health. And there was a stat recently I came across. So if you have a first degree relative with borderline personality, then psychiatry says you have an increased 5% or 5 times increased, yeah, 5 times increased likelihood of perhaps having BPD, or someone in the family having BPD. And then they want to say that that's heritability, which I think is abject nonsense, because remember, they can't prove heritability. So if they could ever come up with some proof, that might matter. But in the meantime, as the child, a long time ago now, the adult child still, because she's still here, of a BPD NPD mother, I would have to say the reason I got labeled with, not diagnosed with, and I'm going to have more coming on what does this mean about my experience with BPD, which was highly atypical. I was not as severely impacted as people are today, period, and the more severely impacted. But the thing is, I don't think I got BPD because my mother had BPD because it was inherited. It's look at the way that kids don't get their needs met. Look at what happens, the trauma. BPD is a trauma based thing, totally response. And so like I don't know that much about my mother's history as a kid because nobody would talk much about it, but she had a sister that would talk about it sometimes. And I think their father, I think the mother was, I think my grandmother was probably quite borderline, and I didn't get to know her very much. She was very nice to me, but she died when I was 7. But she was so quiet and so, whatever. But sometimes a quiet borderline who's quiet to the world isn't always quiet at home or always quiet. But so, yeah, I just think that this attributing that you're 5 times more likely if you have a first degree relative with BPD to get BPD. Well, they can't prove that's heritability, And then there's all this misinformation online about that BPD is a chemical imbalance in the brain. No, it's not. That BPD is something physical in the brain. No, it's not. And I'm going to have lots more coming on the reality of trauma and how trauma affects the brain. Yes, it does, but how neuroplasticity in all forms, not all, but many forms of therapy is real. And so, whatever has impacted the brain in childhood or adulthood from stress and trauma and abuse, can people still can heal and recover. These are not because the brain can change itself in the healing and recovery process as much because it's involved in how people think is how the brain is going to work or not work so well. But it's not a chemical imbalance. I just want to touch on that too because that's just such erroneous information. You get a chemical imbalance if you're in your brain only if you have a neurological physical problem, perhaps, which BPD isn't, or if you take psychiatric medications. Anyway, and Marcus said, yes, there is a new feminist group pushing against a new wave led by a woman named Riley Reid. Oh, I haven't heard of her, but there's another woman. First name is Karen, and I can't think of her last name. I should know. She was in the Red Pill documentary as well, but she has a YouTube channel and presence, and very much for men's rights. And being for men's rights doesn't mean that a person can't also care about women's rights, but the clients I deal with, and I've always dealt with more men than women in any point in time in working with people over the last 30 years, because not always, women are hurt by cluster bees also, and women could start their own movement to not want to be with men. I suppose they could. I don't know that they have, like in terms of cluster B, but I know that MGTOW and red pill can extend beyond that. But there's so many horror stories that men have of like a woman, whether cluster B or not, cheats on the guy and gets pregnant and then passes the kid off as the husband's, and then in a matter of time, because the truth always comes out, whether it's 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, or more, the man finds out the child isn't his, and then like rights get really diminished right there. These are just a couple examples, but there's so many others. Like in cluster B women, how often they will set up a male partner to look like they've abused them when unlike other women who may have been abused, these women are abjectly lying and setting things up and trying to make a man look bad because out of their own lack of personal responsibility, etc. But all they want to do is win and punish, win and punish. And that's not okay if a man with BPD or NPD does that to a woman. It's not okay if a woman does that to a man. And I mean, I'm somebody who grew up under the tyranny of a dark haired father who was a misogynist pig, a chauvinist a-hole, and beyond. And but I did that healing work, and I recognize that most men are certainly not like him. So I just think it's really important for people to. I think my passion is really about understanding human context, and also. Oh, somebody says, "Are you kidding?" No, I'm not kidding at all. But if you don't agree, you don't agree. That's life, right? But the thing is, so most what was I gonna say now? Um, if only we could achieve equality. We can't. So what does that mean for either, in terms of feminism versus masculinism and men versus women in this regard? Well, I'm glad you think it's funny. That's good for you. Then, don't waste my time and don't waste yours, okay? And you're probably just a troll anyways, but who knows really. So anybody that can think what's happening to men and does happen to some women is funny really needs to go and get their head checked, in my humble opinion. Well, that's good. Okay. So I see we got some people here that just want to play as usual. What else is new on this platform? So anyway, I'm going to keep speaking up for MGTOW men and Red Pill men, and some, whether they are totally embracing that for themselves in their own need for their own rights and their own choices and their own lifestyles, or whether it's a result of cluster B women, which it is for a lot of men, but not all. Yeah, so the goal of feminism, today apparently is to challenge the systemic inequalities faced that women face on a daily basis. So, kind of contrary to the belief that feminism has nothing to do with belittling men, in fact, feminism does not support sexism. Well, I think fifth wave feminism does against either gender. And so they claim that feminism works towards equality, which again, we can't achieve because we can have, like Jordan Peterson so aptly put it a couple of years ago, equality of opportunity cannot guarantee equality of outcome. You can't measure it by equality of outcome. But then one has to think philosophically to realize that we can't achieve equality. Maybe two people together sometimes can. Oh, okay. Well, I misunderstood that. Sorry. It's with text. You never know. It's just not good to be alone. You said. Well, sometimes for some people, it being alone is a really fabulous thing because to be alone and to know oneself and to be able to celebrate oneself in a healthy way and take good self care is way better than being with somebody who's toxic or abusive to you. That's not to say that that should be somebody's lifetime goal. Well, you can say that's why MGTOW doesn't sound good. Well, but everybody has a right to make their own choice, right? And I just think that, I mean, it's a contentious issue. I know that. And I get a lot of women thinking, oh, that I'm anti female or anti feminine. But feminism today, I do see it as way out there. I do see it as, the younger generations, like, I don't know, where are they in their 20s now? Or like, late teens, 20s, maybe even early 30s, this fifth wave of feminism and what's going on university campuses. And I think that what Jordan Peterson said is really, really super important to take into account in all of this, which is, you know, first of all, equality doesn't exist in reality. It's a lovely concept, but philosophically, you got to deconstruct it, because how do we apply it? How do we measure it? How do we achieve it? Don't think we ever do in any way, shape, or form, let alone between men and women. And the other thing is, so he said, like, that equality of opportunity is one thing, but equality of outcome, it becomes way too individual to try to, in any collectivism or collective way, try to measure or ascertain what that really is or should be. Oh, the phone's always going off. Hi, Billy the Goat. How are you? And Teutonic said, it's good to be alone when young as a man, using time to acquire what you need to become a man. Well, that could be very true, yes. I'm not here to say that. I'm trying to show that what's wrong with it. Okay. I'm not here to say feminism is poison, but the fifth wave is something else. I think there's been feminism that's important, but I think it's not more important than men's rights. Again, where's the quote equality unquote in that? Um, well, men and women being equal, any two people being equal, in a philosophical kind of construct, and in reality, is very hard to measure, right? So, um, and oh, you're saying they aren't. Well, yeah, because there's too many, there's differences that need to be embraced instead of repelled. But the bottom line to all this is that what's happening for men, and it happens for women, it's all about mommy or daddy issues largely. And if people don't, people can heal those issues. And that's something that I know that I did. Because if you would have told me when I was like a kid or in my teens or early 20s, suffering from what my dark chat father was like and did to me, if you would have told me that I would have been advocating for men or working with men or caring as much as I do about the plight of men, as I care about the plight of women too, I don't see that as mutually exclusive in any way. I wouldn't have believed it, but that's been the experience in my life. And what it speaks to is when we heal the issues of a wounding, damaging, abusive, or traumatizing parent, which I had two of them, by the way, so, you know, but my father, I healed those issues so that I do not see all men through the lens of that one man, who I can't really say much positive about. Billy Goat, not bad. Yeah, it's been a while, and you've been busy. Well, good. Busy is good. Um, you said finally MGTOW topic. Yeah. Let me see. You said men and women complement. Well, they can complement each other, or it can be the exact opposite, right? Because they're not the same for all men or all women. And Billy Goat, I speak to a lot of MGTOWs. What are they telling you about why they've chosen MGTOW? That'd be interesting to know. Um, Well, yes, it is about embracing differences, but it's also about respect and about healthy love, or, health, because men and women are friends too. It's about a healthy attitude and understanding differences and embracing them, yes, but many, many people can't do that. And especially when it comes to cluster B women. And of course, the same is true for women with cluster B men. But women have so many more resources, although resources are getting depleted today. But many women have resources out there that men don't. And then society also makes it very difficult for a man, should he be being physically abused, which many men are by cluster B women, that's just as important, just as wounding, if not as physically impacting in some cases, but it can be that also. And where's a man supposed to go? And in the Red Pill documentary, so I don't know if much has changed since then, there was at that time one shelter in America, in the whole country of America, one shelter. I don't even know if there's any in Canada for men. And the thing is, what man wants to go because of culture and society and the definition of what a man's supposed to be, etc.? As if men aren't supposed to feel, as if men can never be vulnerable or get hurt or traumatized. many men would be too embarrassed or ashamed to go to a shelter if there was one to go to. And I think that's still a huge inequity and a huge difficulty, and it's cultural. And I didn't have any children, but I knew one thing: if I was ever gonna, and I ever had a boy, man, I was going to do my best to not. I don't think that boys should be raised like girls, but boys still aren't being raised, and maybe by some parents, but not enough parents to be able to. And society works against the reality that they have vulnerability, and that's not, it's not unmasculine or toxic masculinity for men to feel, you know? Well, share something there, Billy the Goat. That would be really helpful, because this is not an easy thing to talk about, and whether you're a woman or a man, you can get people disagreeing with you pretty vehemently on this topic, which I think makes it all the more important to talk about. You said MGTOWs don't hate women. It's just women have been conditioned to exploit and abuse the system. Well, many women, yes. And the other thing is that the systems are there working more for women and leaving out men largely. So I think that in that regard, men who come to realize this, men who have this experience in their life, whatever this means, um, yes, I mean, I'll just throw in one thing here that'll sound crazy, because I am a lesbian, but when I was with a BPD NPD alcoholic that was a partner of mine for 2 years, and I got out of that, abusive as all get out of here. Um, so what happened there? So just to give another slant on this. So we're both women, obviously. She was the abuser. I was the victim at the time. Not that I'm claiming big victimhood, but it was really painful. To be with a BPD NPD alcoholic. I mean, I think anybody who's been with a BPD NPD knows that. But the thing is, so when I sought help, and she was a social worker, but like she is no longer. Long story. But anyway, she was a social worker, and so in the city we were living, people knew her, etc., etc., but they didn't know her like I knew her. They didn't know what an abuser and how crazy and like just mentally unwell she was. And so when I went to a women's sexual abuse center looking for help, she got there first, or she had a friend there. And so if two women, so if you're with a cluster B woman, and I, as I was in between 2004 2006, the VPD NPD alcoholic, I was, I think, experiencing just a tad bit what a lot of men could experience, which is the abuser goes somewhere to an agency or something in society, supports women. In this case, we're both women, but I couldn't access help because of all the people she triangulated and gaslit about me, as if I was abusing her. And so this is what happens to a lot of men. So I've had my own experience with this. It wasn't a male female thing, but I experienced being the person that was being abused, that got left out of the system because the system couldn't choose which one of us to believe. Like, it was ridiculous. Never mind. I think society conditions men to find women with cluster B traits attractive. Well, I don't know if society conditions that. I think it's woundedness in childhood that conditions that. And this ongoing intergenerational, the parenting problems, and then what happens to children in that. Teutonic, after my dad's divorce, he was homeless for about a month. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Billy the Goat. So there's a lot of shaming against MGTOW, calling us women haters, extremists, losers. Oh, yes, and incels. Yes, well, that's a totally different thing, isn't it? I'm sorry to hear that, and that's why I'm speaking up now, because I'm not saying that all the clients I work with who are men are, MGTOW or red pill. They're not all, of course not, but many have been, and it has. I'm not trying to sing my praises here, but many men who have found me to work with, it's like they just couldn't believe that somebody finally could hear them, and it's so important that they be heard. And so I'm not anti anything, but I am not for fifth wave feminism. I think it is fanaticism. I think it's ridiculous. I think it's unnecessary. And I don't believe, like, the second wave or the fourth wave was different. Um, and nobody's questioning really the first wave. I'm not sure about the third, but this fifth wave is crazy. That's what I really see. And it's not about equality. It's about on the far left of this radical feminism, and I'm not even a conservative, by the way, so just saying, they are absolutely trying to advocate for a matriarchy, if you will, versus the patriarchy. Now, is there still some patriarchy in society? Sure, but it's in the power elites. It's not, I mean, and there could be the odd guy, but it's not most men, you know? So, anyway, um, Teutonic, he was a military staff sergeant at the time. Wow, he must have been really devastated. I'm really sorry to hear that. Billy go, but we recognize they're trying to discredit and provoke us. Well, yeah, and what do you think that's really about, Billy the Goat? Because why don't people recognize that a MGTOW man or red pill man or whatever decision a man makes in his life is valid for that man at least? Like I even don't I don't know, but a lot of men are very critical too, and they think, oh, you just like, yeah, whining and blaming women, and you gotta man up. I don't agree with that at all, by the way. So I don't know what a lot of women think, but I know some men think that. Never mom, cluster B women tend to play victim, be fragile, etc. And men are conditioned to believe this is healthy femininity. That's why I always see men chase after cluster B disordered women. Well, I get your point there, and there's validity to it. But the thing is, it's not all men chasing after cluster B women. It's men who have been wounded largely by their mothers in childhood. But it's sort of like the same thing that, if I'd have been straight, I'd have definitely been chasing a man like my father, unfortunately, and that would have been horrific. And I think I found a piece of him in the BPD NPD alcoholic woman I was with from 2004 to 2006 anyway. I learned so much through that experience because people have to remember on this channel when I work with clients, etc. It's not just education or whatever, blah blah blah. I've been on both sides of this fence, and I also had two partners that were quiet BPD, one ages ago, one a year and a half ago, two very different outcomes. And of course, I recovered from BPD, which is still like, you're not supposed to be allowed to say that, but like that's tough, you know. Um, and then you said, I'm not sure how to say your name, that's why I'm not saying it. You said, I mean, if you categorize yourself as red pill, but I don't know what the context of that is right now. Billy the Goat. Now women have started to come out with, oh, WGTOW and pink pill. Oh, well. And then you said sounds blue pill to me. Well, I think that if women want to do that when they've experienced it's not always about cluster B. I get that, right? But if their experience has been really as bad as it has been for a lot of men that are in MGTOW and red pill, etc., the context of their lives, I mean, I think it's equally as we should give equal respect to women going their own way or pink pill as men going their own way or red pill. I mean, it's about their individual coming together as collectives, maybe their individual human context and experience, right? Um, and Billy Goat, MGTOW is a huge problem for them, society, because we're not playing the game. Well, and you know what? Even with, cluster B women, of course, the horror and trauma of that for men, just like cluster B men for women, or for same sex people, cluster B, whatever. But the thing is, yeah, when you say it's a huge problem, MGTOW, for them, well, in society, because you're not playing the game, it's very true. But why should men stay in, quote, the game, unquote, where society not only devolving for all of us, but society is not providing men with very little, if any, opportunity to have rights. Um, and Billy the Goat, WGTOW is a joke because they're following the path set by MGTOW, and it's not really going their own way. Well, that's interesting. I'll have to like read about that because I don't know. This is the first time hearing about that. You say MGTOW is a joke because it's a bunch of guys going their own way together. I don't think either is a joke based on that, but everybody can have their own opinion. Never mind, I do agree men who are attracted to cluster B women have been wounded by their mothers. Yes, just like, a lot of, most people, okay, so women or men who are attracted to the opposite sex or the same sex, it's often going to go back to woundedness from mother. It can be woundedness from father too, but unfortunately, woundedness from mother is even deeper than woundedness from father. Doesn't mean that fathers aren't important, they are. I would have given anything to have one that I could have, like, related to or known, but he was just a little bit of a beastie, that guy. And I'm just saying that about my father, not all men. But that's why it's so important for people to get into healing recovery journeys too, to really heal from that wounding parent, because it really does make a difference on how you can go forward in relationships that are healthier or not, right? Ability to go, and what is it? Sorry, and what it says is basically what women are already doing: no self-reflection, blaming, etc. Eddie, hey there. As between two people, society defers to the one that can claim greater victim status. The patriarchy is generous in this regard, but because this generosity has been fetishized, we are doomed. Well, yes, because I think maybe going back to the 1950s and prior, would it be somewhat accurate to say that men back then, growing up, were kind of sort of programmed or trained, inculcated to sort of put women on a pedestal? And I don't mean idealization, but yes, there was sort of this idea that, the man would do anything for the woman. And of course, that's not all across the board. But interesting that you said the patriarchy is generous in that regard, and I think that goes back to earlier, decades ago. Um, how do you define low cluster women? What do you mean low cluster? I mean, there's various impacts of cluster B. So all people with BPD aren't the same. All people with NPD aren't the same. All, women versus men. But I'm not sure what you mean by low cluster women. If you could specify that a little bit more, that would be helpful. Um, or yeah, you said or cluster B. Well, what do you mean by low cluster B? Teutonic. I hated my mother after that divorce and still kind of do, even though they remarried. Wow, they remarried after that. How did that go? I wonder if they found their way to some peace and harmony, or if it was still highly conflictual. But, I mean, how we're affected by a parent, or in some cases like mine, both. I can't, it would take forever, and I'd say, this isn't to be all about me. But I had the experience of both parents being narcissists, and comorbid with other things. And but there was an impact from my mother in that, sure. And then there was, the impact of my father and how wounding that was. But again, whatever we look at and whatever we want to heal, that we seriously work in a healing process about, we can release, and we can grow, and we can change. But what we don't acknowledge, what we resist, will just persist, will become an entrenched pattern in relating going forward, in adulthood and relationship after relationship for some people. Teutonic. I read that. Sorry. Never mom. My mother is a narcissist sociopath, and was her husband, not my father. And my older relative was and my other relative was BPD. In a way, in through this chaos, I see how foolish the gender wars are. Well, yeah, and maybe I'm trying to speak to that right now by just saying again, as I've said before, and I don't mean to dwell on me, that I had a BPD NPD comorbid mother and a dark triad father, and so the impact of that. I mean, I just knew I needed to do a lot of healing recovery, which I did do, but then one would think I wouldn't get along with either sex or gender ever, right? Which wasn't the case. But I also do think that for some people could um a lesbian or homosexual orientation be tied to trauma? It can be, but is it always? No, it isn't. You're saying you mean cluster B, right? But I don't know what you mean by low cluster B, so I'm sorry, I still can't really elucidate or clarify or say anything to that because I don't know what you mean. Billy to go, MGTOW has hurt women, so we see WGTOW as a reaction to avoid feeling rejected. Well, and when did WGTOW start? Because I will have to look into this. I hadn't heard of it. I mean, is it really recent? And Teutonic, my parents knew each other since they were 8 years old and have had 3 kids. Wow, knew each other since they were 8 years old. Don't hear that too often. And then mom laugh out loud. Sorry for all the typos on my phone. Oh, that's okay. It happens. I mean, whenever I'm typing on my phone, it's kind of a nightmare too. Can appreciate that. But I think that, I guess there's so much divide and conquer in this world, right? So MGTOW, red pill men would be one part of that. But interestingly enough, that whatever, excuse me, a lot of women might feel about that, there's equally as many men out there thinking that there's something, weaker or less masculine about these men, which I really think is I find really objectionable. I don't think, it's just utter judgment and all this divide and conquer. Well, I mean, people make choices, and if that creates a divide and conquer, well, that it happens a lot in a lot of different. But I don't think that's the reason why men are going their own way is to create some divide and conquer. But there still is not established. Women have all kinds of places to go for all kinds of things to reach out for help, and men don't. And then again, men have been inculcated largely not to think that that's not okay, that somehow that is emasculating to them, which many men may feel that way, but I don't believe that it is that way. But if they feel that way, then they still have that challenge to deal with. And oh, WGTOW is very recent. Okay, so I'm gonna be interested to look into that. You know what? You can keep telling me that you said you mean cluster B until hell freezes over. It doesn't mean anything to me, because you asked me something about what's low cluster B. Yeah, you said, how do you define low cluster women? Cluster B women, what do you mean by low? I'm quite versed with cluster B, thank you. But I don't know what you mean by low cluster B at all. Because whose terminology is that and what does that mean? So you're like, oh my gosh, just Google it. Well, if you have a question for me, maybe you can just Google that and take your chances too. Because if you can't clarify the question, I can't answer the question. It's that simple. Never mom. Interestingly, my trauma would suggest I would hate all gender as well. But in a sense, it opened my eyes to overall issues, made me very intuitive. I'm sort of grateful. I can relate to that, never mom, because I feel the same way now and have for like a lot of years of my life, like almost 30 years now. Well, maybe I didn't feel grateful initially, so maybe 25 years or so. Um, because yeah, like I was no contact from the family of origin, my choice. And in that no contact period, which still goes on today, but I mean, there's been a little bit of contact once in a blue moon. Um, like I got contacted in a circuitous route by the BPD NPD mother to tell me 8 months after the Dark Triad father died that he died. That's the dysfunction in the narcissistic dysfunctional family of origin I come from. So, which was clearly the BPD NPD mother of mine's punishing me. So, but yeah, it's really important to heal. But I don't know that there's like many people can heal now, maybe, and many I don't know what WGTOW is about. I have to look into that. But for MGTOW men or red pill men or other men's rights movements, maybe even in their healing, they're not going to change what they inherently want for their own lives, which I don't think is for anybody. I mean, people will and do, but I don't want to judge anything. Whether I have to read up about WGTOW, but it could well be a response to MGTOW. Um, Billy go, the weaker feminized men we believe is a result of fathers being cut off from a child's life. Oh, that's very interesting, yes. Also, they want to hold on to the fantasy. They still want to date, have sex, so are sort of dependents. Well, that's interesting because I think too that this idea of and it's hard to quantify, but a more, as you're saying, as a man. So I will just quote you: weaker or feminized men that you believe and MGTOW believes is a result of fathers being cut off from a child's life. Well, it certainly can be because especially when that mother's a cluster B, but even if not, I mean, children need all kinds of role models, right? And I think that as more, and I'm getting real controversial here, but I think as more lesbian women and gay men have families, etc., etc., I know that I have friends who are lesbians who have children, and they work really hard to make sure if they have a male child that that male child has many males in their lives and role models in their life, because it's important that every child is exposed to both gender, and then of course any gender in between. Teutonic Wigtow is mostly 40 plus women, by the way. Well, that's interesting. I don't know if there's a, I could look it up. I don't know if there's a mean or average age of, I mean mean in the way that I mean, not mean like is in, not nice. Average age for MGTOW men, but I know a lot of MGTOW men are younger. I do know that because of clients I've worked with. I'm not saying all of them, but a lot are millennials. And it seems like in the millennial generation, which wouldn't be, they're not a monolithic group either, but many men in that age bracket, in that generation today, don't know what to do with millennial women, and they aren't getting together as much as other generations have. I'm not saying they're not getting together at all, but there's a lot of issues there. So I've heard from a lot of clients, and of course there's a lot of cluster B in the mix, but it's not always at the center of everything. Although in many people's lives it is. Oh, hey Natalie, listening from work. That's cool. So yeah, I just think it's interesting that um, and this really isn't the live stream to talk about the topic of. I don't know what low cluster B means to this moment, or what somebody means by it. But definitely, we'll be talking more about the fact that all people with BPD, many have recovered, many will never recover. Lots aren't going to treatment. It's all different iterations. But people keep talking about all this stuff like everybody is the same in any given certain group. It doesn't forward an educated or meaningful dialogue, in my humble opinion. Billy go, yep, the youngest I've come across is like 16 years. In MGTOW, you must mean, yes. Teutonic, I'm 23, found MGTOW at 15 or around 15. Interesting. Yeah, well, and I just think that people shouldn't be judging people. And so, MGTOW also has, broadly termed on the internet, right, that they have a manosphere. I don't see anything wrong with that. And they focus on men's self ownership rather than changing the status quo through activism and protest. Um, and then, of course, it says here that the MGTOW community has been called a misogynistic group. I certainly don't see it that way. Categorized as part of the alt right. I don't see it that way either. And like I said, I'm not on the right of the, absurdity of the political whatever that's about. Um, yes, and it has been said online that, like what Billy the Goat said, that MGTOW has been defined as alt right and identified as being, quote, on the borders of the hateful incel community, end quote, by the Southern Poverty Law Center. So this is going on in the United States. Um, yes, and somebody wrote, Mark Lamoureux wrote in Vice that the MGTOW community's history is murky, but it was most likely birthed in the mid early 2000s by two men who go online aliases of Solaris and Ragnar. So I don't know. And apparently they were originally libertarian, and now they're generally associated with the manosphere and men's rights movements. So I don't know what's misogynistic about that, though. I don't. Any more than, yeah, the opposite. Whatever the opposite would be. Uh, oh, well, I just read something off the internet right there. So, you're saying, Billy Goat, not activism protests. That's a misconception. Okay, well, please do share. Like, what is actually happening then? Is MGTOW involved in activism? Because I would think that would make sense. Rab, AJ, is there any feedback with your clients on dating apps? Do you find it's more difficult to date online these days? Are people expecting too much? Well, yes, a lot of my clients, and over the years, maybe the last 10, 15, especially 10 maybe, um, just horror stories and terrible experiences through dating apps. Now, that's not going to be everybody, but guess where the cluster bees tend to go? To dating apps, for all kinds of reasons. And then you said, so do you find it's more difficult to date online these days? Yeah, I think that based on what clients have told me, because I've never tried to date online, it is harder and harder. And what's making it more difficult is cluster B and or other issues people can have that, and people who just, narcissists trying to have all the image stuff up front. There's usually many red flags to see in these profiles or initial contacts with people. But I think just like in real life, but maybe a little bit more exponentially a higher percentage, dating online is huh, sort of like if you had a swimming pool for a guy, sort of like if you had a swimming pool full of women that were already labeled as cluster B and you decided to dive in the water anyway. So it's like I just think cluster Bs gravitate to online dating sites for all kinds of reasons that aren't healthy. Doesn't mean everybody who tries to find, get a date, talk to someone, meet someone on an app is a cluster B though. But more than not, I think. Um, oh, Billy to go. Many call it a movement. It's not. Oh, okay. And so, what would you describe MGTOW as? Because yeah, I've used the word movement, and I don't want to be incorrect about that. So if it's not a movement, um, how would we say that more appropriately? That like and not use the word movement. Never, mom. I still don't know how to feel about MGTOW, but it's not my business to know. But I do believe in men being educated on cluster B women. Well, yes, but remember, not all MGTOW is a response to cluster B women. I mean, maybe a lot of it is, or a portion of it is, but not all of it is. And then you said, I noticed the men in my NPD support group often fall for cluster B women almost more so than the women. Um, I don't know. That's interesting. I think it could be. I'm not sure, but one thing I do know, and I want to be very gentle in saying this, not every client I work with or have worked with, but men have a lot of men have much more difficulty with the trauma of a cluster B woman or, maybe even the woundedness in childhood from a mother. I don't know why that is because it's not easy for women either. But never, it might be the fact that women are raised that it's more socially okay for them to feel, talk about their feelings. It might have something to do with that, but I wouldn't quantify that that would be the seat of the whole, just difference. Never mind, but not by much, but it's a close comparison. I say 60% of the men in my support group are vulnerable to cluster B women, and 40% of the women are give or take. Oh, it's interesting. So MGTOW, is that what you mean, Teutonic? MGTOW is a philosophy? Billy the Goat, we don't create petitions or try to change the system. We just remove ourselves from it. We offer suggestions on how things could change for the better, but it's not up to us. And then you said, and we know it probably won't change, so we focus on our self-preservation. Well, that's really interesting, and I mean, I think, yeah, it saddens me to know that men are having it that difficult, and yet I do understand that. And I think, and that's a societal thing. I'm not trying to say, like, let's blame every woman for that. No, but it's kind of like the overall development of society and the fact that, how could anybody with men's rights or MGTOW or anything else or something on the women's side of things change much in society right now in a world that's devolving into the chaos that it's in. It's like, not to sound like a total pessimist or anything, but it just makes everything else exponentially, um, gives less remedy, I think, to so many things in our world today for groups of people and for individuals alike. But I just think it's really important to come out in support of the fact that, as a woman, and yes, I learn because I work with men, but it's like a really, it's a full circle understanding for me, coming from a Tarchad father and all of that, and needing to heal all of that. And just because I'm a lesbian doesn't mean I don't like men. I do like men, and I really care about men, and I have male friends. And some of them are gay and some of them are heterosexual, and I really value men. And I think that, so that's just another thing too, just as if to suggest that women, and I use the word lesbian because it's not really right to say gay of women, but um, yeah, just because I have an orientation or whatever, that way, then it doesn't mean it's anything against men, and it's not a reaction to my father either. I've been all through that in recovery. So, and it works the other way around too, of course, and I think that, this is such a cliched thing to say, but it's so important that we can try to look at each other's differences, and recognize that, and then, everybody gets to make their own decisions for themselves and their lives, right? So, um, and I really think that there needs to be a lot more men's rights out there, and needs to be a lot more done in what I see as a predominantly systemically narcissistic legal system in Canada as well as the US, and I'm sure other Western countries, and maybe more than that. It's predominantly not a system that functions well, especially in divorce, men with, maybe men in general, but with cluster B women. It's really, it fails more often than it works. And I've had so many clients that I've been working with that go through that failure, both men and women, to be truthful though. But it happens a lot more to men. Um, and Billy go, this is why we don't hate women. We feel sorry for them. Well, it's interesting. How, in what way do you feel sorry for them? Teutonic, yes, a philosophy with various groups of men who follow it. Well, and you know something? I mean, I advocate that it's healthy for people to have their own and follow their own personal philosophy. So that makes a lot of sense to me. Ability to go, many MGTOW want relationships. We would want families. We have big hearts, but we've been hurt badly from it. Yes, I hear you. And you said many are like father figures to others. And going our own way, saying no to relationships also hurts us. But many don't see that. They think we're bitter. Oh, yeah, I hear you, Billy the Goat. I can totally well appreciate that because, people that can't recognize other people's choices and maybe try to understand more about that, or at least not judge that outright without understanding, don't realize that, like, it's easy to, throw stones at people and judge them and say, oh, they're bitter. But no, I don't think that of MGTOW men or red pill men or men that are in any men's rights movement, that because men need their rights, like Maybe when I was a kid, it was a different world, and maybe it was more like, like that second wave or third or whatever it was in the 60s. I see that as being something that was different than what it is today, but it didn't really largely help family. And I also don't know if these movements came out of the ether of, like, for example, in the 60s, was it really just women and what they were trying to achieve, or was it a kind of bigger agenda? Like we see a lot of, quote, bigger agendas, unquote, whatever that might mean in the world today. Because that it seems to me in the 60s with that wave of feminism, which I don't think was like what it is today, but still, I've always been an advocate that if you're going to have a child and you're a woman, then you'd better be with that child for the first 7 years of his or her life. And you'd better be the mother that that child requires to raise a healthy and give a person a chance to be a healthy, responsible citizen. And so women wanting to have it all in that regard is something that I've been really conflicted about because, well, A, I never had children. I didn't want to because I was in my own healing and recovery and I wouldn't have been responsible to do so. And secondly, if I would have had a child, I would not have put career first or tried to balance both equally. I just don't think it works. And let's face it, kids need both parents, but in the beginning, mother is the first object and it all matters so friggin' much. So something really, in the 60s wave of feminism, going into the 70s, we see clearly from there the development of the family as an institution, which I'm not going to lay squarely at the feet of women, but, hmm, you know, that's a subject can really piss off a lot of women. Teutonic, I want a traditional woman and many children. Well, and there's nothing wrong with wanting that because there are women out there that are still more traditional, but they must be darn hard to find because probably not the majority. Ability to go, so they become kind of like slaves to their egos, the system. Well, and I think for a lot of women too, not that this excuses anything, as it doesn't for men either, but like the woundedness in childhood and what's going on with that is just proliferating, right? I mean, with each generation, the cluster B aspects and cluster A and cluster C, and what all that really means in a humanistic context is proliferating. Because now I really believe, like to Rab's question earlier, like on dating apps, I think you're really going to see way more cluster Bs than people that aren't. And it doesn't mean they're all cluster Bs, but you gotta remember that psychiatry statistics or any study stats are going to be off because they don't and they can't account for, it's not scientific anyway, but they can't account for all the people that haven't presented to mental health systems. They can't account for all the people that may well have narcissistic personalities or borderline personality, and they have never been on the radar of a mental health professional. They are undiagnosed, out there living or trying to survive or struggling or doing whatever they're doing, and they're not even in the statistics, which is a big because no stat is accurate for that reason alone. But I'm not here to say like I'm no expert on MGTOW. I mean, I think you have to be a man to be that, but also that I know there's a lot of men who are in MGTOW because or have that philosophy, I should say, yes, because of cluster B women. And I'm not saying all, but a lot. And Billy, they go, those traditional women we call unicorns, laugh out loud. Well, I mean, I guess there's something to be said for a traditional woman. I mean, I think that, uh, yeah, I mean, a more traditional woman, as long as they don't have cluster B, would be really, I think, a wonderful thing for any generation if they could have mothers that are there nurturing and caring and doing all of the things that are so important to healthy to getting through the early stages of childhood development in a healthy way. Teutonic, I want to move countries one day just to find me a unicorn. Well, I mean, I can totally understand that. And if you know which country you're more likely to have success with that in, then that's a good thing if you can get there someday. Billy the Goat, the MGTOW community would highly respect you, AJ, purely because you're asking us questions. Well, I've talked, I've not only talked to clients who are MGTOW, but I've talked to MGTOW men and on live streams before too. And um, I can't remember right now, but if maybe I'll do a video on it and link to a channel because there's a channel that a MGTOW man who used to come to my live streams a year or two ago shared with me. And when I went over there, and it's about men's pain and what happens to men, and I wept, and it was really impacting for me. And I suppose in my own, understanding of this and respect for men, I, yeah, it's kind of like a way of, well, one thing isn't related to the other, but I just feel so blessed to be able to hear my clients, hear men on live streams. I'm totally open and understanding of this and understanding how women feel at the same time. But the cluster B women, what they're doing to me, there's no justification for that, or vice versa too. But I guess what I'm just trying to say is it's been a really humbling learning experience, and I'm always open to learning more and wanting to understand people's experience. And if that is the experience of men, then that's as valid as anything else. And somehow, I guess what I'm stumbling around to try to say is it it just warms my heart to understand and want to know more and to support men when I have clients who are MGTOW men or red pill men, because, or when talking to men in MGTOW or red pill men's rights movements as well, like, and other men's rights movements. I realize MGTOW is a philosophy, because it sort of, I don't know, I just think back to what my father was like, and in all, well, not fairness, but when I think about my dark triad father, I've healed from that. He's been dead for like 23 years now or whatever. But yeah, it was brutal in my childhood. It was brutal in life until I went no contact in 1990. But, and then he died, and then my mother thought, well, I'm not going to tell her. That was not a very good experience either. But long and the short of it is that I can look back now and have been able to for some years after forgiving him. Looking and forgiving him doesn't mean anything he did to me was okay. It was not okay. But he's not all men, and I needed to do that healing and recovery work from, the damage from him to know that he's certainly not all men. And we grow up, and whether we're wounded by a mother or a father or both, if we don't do the healing, then we're going to be seeing men and or women or both through this lens of wounded, inner child. But I can see now that my father he went through a lot of stuff that he shouldn't have had to go through in his childhood. And his mother, my grandmother, definitely had BPD at minimum. And then his father was away working, and he was parentified, and he could have been abused in other ways. I don't know, because they would never talk about stuff. But so I see it as, it's again the intergenerational. It doesn't excuse what he did to me, but stuff happened to him. Stuff probably happened to his mother or grandma, father, and on it goes. But this is not about it's in people's genetics. It's in how much we need as young infants to get through the stages of childhood development in a healthy way, because we are not like animals that pop out and can stand up and start walking and gain autonomy rather quickly at all. So, but I just think, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but it brings some kind of, it's not all about me, but it broadens my understanding, and it just continues to help me be more and more at peace with, the father that I had. And I think that also put me in a position where I wanted to understand and know more, as I did my own healing recovery many years ago now. And that is what I try to help others with. And so, yeah, I mean, I think respect is so super important. And thank you for that, Billy the Goat, because I have had nothing but respectful conversations with MGTOW men and Red Pill men. And I was really in the battle with one client some years ago who, I mean, God bless him. He fought every step of the way, and he beat the system here in Ontario, meaning that he, as a man, he actually triumphed over a cluster B X and a lot of horrible things that were done to him, including parental alienation. So, but of course, the years he lost with his children that may be improving, subsequently, they're not children anymore and can't get that back. No, thank you for that, Billy the Goat. I really do care, and I really am a kind person, contrary to a lot of people's opinions online. But then, hey, things don't work out with everybody, right? Rab, AJ, you have to go to see how the dating app profiles look. All these pictures are over the top, exposing too much skin, pics of people jumping out of planes. Oh my goodness, it looks like something out of a magazine. Ah, that would be what I alluded to before in a video of the spectacle of social media and the reality that people have, even somebody who's healthy. I mean, I try not to, but there's a little bit of boundary. So my I don't believe I have an entirely creative persona for online, but more and more people are showing more and more persona across all social platforms. And then there's the them in life, right? And I try to keep it pretty much balanced and bring me to here, as opposed to trying to create. I don't try to create some persona to be here to be me as. That's, but this speaks to the spectacle that, the online world and social media has become in narcissistic culture, which doesn't mean everybody's a narcissist, but people are the spectacle aspect has to do with, and I got to look it up again. Can't remember the philosopher's name, etc. But the idea, you see it if you just watch people, or if you see something on a video, or I don't know, TV or something, where people are at an event or something, which maybe is not still going on much right now in our world now, but and they get out their cameras and everybody's got, and I caught myself doing this with dogs before, and it's like, no, I don't need to get 10 pictures of this. I just need to enjoy it right now. So the spectacle of, technocracy, the spectacle of social media that is really magnified, it sounds like, Rob, on these dating apps is is this idea that people are living through the medium and creating personas through the medium, especially on dating apps. And who are they really, right? Because they're obviously not, or maybe some people do, and then maybe nobody pays attention to them in the spectacle of these dating apps where everybody's trying to create an image and a persona to meet people that I don't get how that ever works, because I know some people never meet. They kind of just have this long distance thing, and then things can happen there. But the idea that somebody would send you a fake picture, and you are, let's say you're like in the same community, and they send you a fake picture, and you're going to meet, well, what are they going to do when they show up then? But it just speaks of disconnect. And so the spectacle of social media is people living, creating personae to live online and through this image stuff. And people don't have to be a narcissist to do this. It's happening so much because it's the way people are getting sucked into and addicted to social media. So that's part of the spectacle I was referring to in a video recently, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that too. And Billy the Goat, when people talk about MGTOW but not actually speak to any MGTOWs, it kind of annoys us. Well, I can understand that because, we all have differences. So a lot of people out there in the world are pretty homophobic, and they think all lesbians or gays are blah, 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 blah. And it's like, yeah, pretty annoying when people just have all these opinions and judgments and don't ever speak to LGBTQ plus, etc. people, So, and that's just another example. There are millions of them, right? But I totally hear you. Um, and I mean, I have, in all fairness, or equity or something. Because fairness is such a like philosophical construct, it isn't in reality either. Some people think objectively it is. Most people agree objectively it's not so much. But I have spoken recently in a few different situations to some radical fifth, radical, I guess it is radical left. I don't know what's the difference between left or right, but fifth wave of radicalized feminism, on steroids. I've actually talked to a few of them recently, and yeah, that doesn't go well at all. I mean, I try to be respectful, but they lose their minds, and so it goes. It's just, and I know that when women, and I've watched a couple women who have high profiles, unlike me, that have been, like one was featured in the Red Pill documentary, etc., that, they've taken a lot of abuse for, clearly seeing. It's like women aren't supposed to see this. Well, more women need to see this. And, I mean, this would be part of what might be able to bring some men and some women back together. I'm not saying all, or that that's people's goals in life. So, but it's just something that when I see, and I've been reading different things online, etc., and even some books, of course. Um, when people just look at things in this absolute kind of way, only it's black and white, right? It's not logical. And or somehow if it's a man criticizing MGTOW, I wonder what does he feel threatened by? And then when a woman stands by and supports MGTOW red pill men, I support the idea of feminism sort of like all the way back, but I don't really think that there are issues facing women today, sure, and they need to be addressed, and yet there is there are systems for that, and there are shelters, and there's a plethora of help for women. Like, it's never okay if a woman is raped. It's never okay if a woman is the victim of domestic violence. But what's fifth wave feminism saying about, like, isn't it just equally as unokay if a man is assaulted in any way, be it sexually or physically? I mean, I don't hear them speaking on that. Never, Mom. I've talked to MGTOW men before. We don't always agree, but I think we can be respectful even if we're on opposite ends of the spectrum. Usually, narcissistic people cannot accept someone different. Well, and again, that's true. But just because sometimes people can't, because we're living in a devolving world, right? So, like, people struggle a lot with differences. They struggle a lot with respecting people that don't agree with them. I'm not saying everybody, but a lot of people, right? And we see that on YouTube all the time. I've seen it in a lot of live streams before. Somebody here took off because they said I should Google something because they wouldn't explain what they meant. Didn't even have anything to do with MGTOW. Somebody else thought, well, I don't know what they thought. Maybe that was. But the point is, like, we have lost civility, and we have lost human as a core value of society, right? Some people, I still have that core value of civility, of respect, of wanting to know somebody else's experience and the context of their experience. I don't have to agree with it. I don't have to disagree with it. I don't have to pass judgment on it, because if I haven't walked in their shoes, it's not for me to say. And I think that we need to start getting more of that into our personal philosophy and our back into our culture. And I think that the idea that, it's only narcissistic people that can't accept someone different. No, that's not true, because lots of people can accept differences and they're not narcissists. So I think that word's getting thrown around. I mean, there's applicability to it, right? But it's getting thrown around way too much. This idea that if you do this or say that or don't agree or or if people are just disrespectful, judgmental. So, okay, maybe a little self-absorbed, but that doesn't mean ipso facto they have narcissistic personality, right? We have to be really careful, I think, in this world where everybody's pointing at everybody's got whatever, and some people just are kind of lost to themselves for whatever reason, have their own woundedness, but it's not always BPD, it's not always NPD. So I think we have to be careful around that. And I'm ability to go, there are narcs in the MGTOW community. Well, of course, because they're everywhere. And you said fakes, etc. But we get on them. Yes, there can be quite a bit of drama at times. Well, I'm sorry to hear that. But then you see MGTOW and in the community, as you call it, right? Because I realize it's a philosophy, but with a community. In any community, there's going to be narcissists or borderlines or people with other challenges and other clusters and comorbidly different things. And it's going to create chaos and drama often. And that's really just more predominant in many areas of life today than ever before. And then you said some talk about, quote, pump and dump, unquote, if the person really must get sex. But I hate that. I'm what would be called a monk. Oh, well, quote, pump and dump, yeah. Well, I wouldn't even judge that because if two consenting adults want to do that, that's their business. But I hear you. Richard, if you want to be in your child's life, you must go through the family court process. Even then, BPDs can disobey the custody order. Alienation is hurtful. Is it to punish or avoidance? Well, Richard, it sounds like I'm sorry if this has been your experience. Really am. I think it's both. I think that it is to hurt. It's to avoid their responsibility. It's to not have to come out of their shell of defense, and face all the triggered emotional dysregulation and get into therapy and like learn how to deal with all that and go deeper and find out what all that's about. And also, I think it's very much to punish. And then it becomes this idea too that people with BPD, and I'm going to explain this briefly. I don't try to justify it, but women with BPD, and when they get married and you have children, well, it's about they don't know how to deal with loss, okay, and they don't know how to have any closure on anything, and so everything in their defensive structure and they're largely false self defensive quote people unquote because they're people without a self. They want to they're very competitive in that regard, in the sense of, our children are now my children and screw you. And yeah, probably what also goes on with that type of punishment from a borderline or narcissistic woman, which wouldn't be the same exactly but has overlap to it, that is, they would be fighting against you as the father of the children, husband or ex-husband, because you become the wounding daddy, right? You're seen as wounding daddy in this sort of way in which people with BPD don't realize. But all that said, does not excuse what they're doing. And also, I would like to add in that many women with BPD and or NPD or comorbidity both that do this kind of thing to men and alienate them from their children or seek to and lie to courts and try to set you up to look like you physically abused them when you didn't, and all this kind of stuff that really goes on more than most people would realize. When they're doing all this, I would have to say they're not just doing it in a defensive way. They are actively fighting daddy through you. But guess what? Yes, they are aiming right at you. They are lying across the board often to authorities and courts, etc. And they do get away with court order violations. And yet, let the man try to do that. Oh, no, 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 no. And I've seen a little bit of this in reverse, though, with I have clients who are the exes of narcissist men, okay, so ex-husbands with narcissistic personality disorder, and what happens, oh, and the way they try to seek and open and redo custody arguments and agreements, and yet they haven't paid any attention to their children. But right now the focus is more for men, so I'm not going to go on about that. But the bottom line is, and even in that situation, though, I should say, because I'm thinking of a couple clients in particular, female clients with ex-male narcissist husbands, etc., and the issues in court. But these women have been able to easily triumph in the court and stand their ground and be heard. Well, they're not, they're mentally healthy women, but maybe suffering from narcissistic abuse still. But the thing is, or CPTSD, but it's that it works the same, it works right in that way, but it's still that preference given to mother, which in these cases that I'm talking about, some women clients of mine with ex narcissist husbands, well, then that is justice, that is right for the kids. But the bottom line is this is how it goes, even when it's totally wrong for the kids. So I think it's avoidance, protection, but it's punishment. And the more that they do, and the more that they lie, and the more that they try to set up the husband or the soon to be ex or the ex husband or the ex, the more they try to set you up and lie and say, I mean, I have clients that their exes have said, like, that they've, sexually abused their own children when it's absolute bullshit. And so this is their, well, I don't want to say pathology, but I guess to a degree, this is pretty, yeah. Can't just say that's humanistic trauma response because it's more than that. There is this streak in so many cluster B women and or men, but in cluster B women that is just all about I gotta win, I gotta beat you. It's a one-upping thing, and it's all about all that they can't realize about themselves. But definitely, I think a lot of them know what the hell they're doing. Straight up, they do. They might not know why, but who cares about that part? Billy the Goat, drama, but it's good as it educates others and refines the philosophy. Well, that's a really, yes, and that's probably, it's like anything that is drama, chaotic, or traumatic. If one sticks with their own process, critical thinking, and or healing, or not taking things on in the first place, then yes, there's always so much to learn from these situations, but they're so incredibly painful. Richard, I wouldn't consider myself MGTOW, however. I feel much better focusing on self-development and spending time with my kids. Well, and that's great, Richard, because I'm just glad you're spending time with your kids. And that's really important. I mean that you're able to, right? And that's really important. And every man has to make his own choice. And I don't think there's any all one way or the other for men. It's individual. And Billy the Goat, we've seen horrendous videos on women beating their kids while laughing and other crazy things. Well, it happens. It really does happen. They do that, and then often they get husbands and fathers arrested for that, and they're the ones who did it. And then that is just, it's horrific all the way around because it's traumatizing the children, and in more ways than one. Teutonic, I've noticed that. Um, hmm. Richard, that's what worries me. I don't know how she behaves when she has the kids. Well, and I think one thing that is often prevalent, when you have shared custody or to whatever degree she sees the kids, they don't stop the parental alienation. They really don't have the emotional maturity or wherewithal to realize how they're harming their children when they will still speak in alienating ways about their, in this case, she may be doing that with your kids about you. And they sometimes can't stop. They just don't have any sense of the right and wrong there, and they'll still speak in parental alienating ways. And the thing about that is, though, it's you have your children in your life, you're seeing it, which is great. But then what's happening? So you have to kind of watch how are your kids responding, and kids don't really want to tell on mom necessarily, right? Um, but you have to kind of see how they're doing and keep an eye on them because if she is still, trash talking about you to your children, not necessarily they're going to come right to you and tell you that, but they're going to start being ripped apart, by what happens a lot with cluster B women. Even when custody is shared or whatever the arrangement is, they can't stop trying to alienate the kids from the other parent. And then the kids start getting ripped apart inside, depending on their age and depending on whether or not they can rationalize and reason through this. But it still is wounding to children because mother is such an important figure in kids' lives, even when it's going all wrong or it's not healthy. And Billy the Goat, there was a feminist video saying men should be forced to be castrated after 50 or the third child. Um, right. Well, that's pretty abhorrent because can't women keep their legs closed? See, this is the problem. It's like, I'm not saying this of all women, but there's obviously a significant number of women out there, be they cluster B or not. I would think they're not all cluster B, that just have this strong, like the radical fifth wave feminism. What are they so, quote, victimized by exactly? I'd like to know. I tried to ask that question to a couple of women I was speaking to recently that they're not clients or anything, just like in my life speaking to. Because my partner happens to know all these really fun people. Some of them aren't so much fun, but it has to do with what she does and what her passion is. And so, anyways, we were brought together in this really uncomfortable space, and I think she knew, and she respects me, and I respect her. And my partner knew this could probably explode, and I remember she gave me this look, and I'm like, well, because I wanted to listen. I tried to be respectful, and then when they were screaming and yelling at me, I just like stayed quiet. But yeah, it's just so that they would say that a feminist video saying that about men. It's like, what about women's responsibility too? Like there's unequal responsibility there, right? For when a man and a woman want to consent to be together, and whether or not they want another child or not, right? And what can they do to make sure that doesn't happen? It's not just all on men, and it's not just all on women either. But wow, that's radical stuff. And Billy Goat, kids end up living in suitcases because they keep shifting between parent homes. Yes, well, many years ago, yeah, I was renting a place. This is how I got involved in this. It was my codependency, probably. But I was renting a place from a young guy. I was a lot younger, but I was in my 30s, but he was younger, 25 or something. And his parents, they had 6 kids in the family. Long story short, his parents would help each of their kids to buy a house. So they would buy half and the other, and then the kid, the adult child would pay it off eventually. But long story short, so myself and a partner at the time renting out a large basement in this guy's house because he had 2 rooms upstairs rented out, the basement rented out, because they were always working on the house and just they got incentives and tax breaks and all this kind of stuff. So it was a really good way for him to keep building and adding on to the house and refurbishing and finishing the house, that he would go on to, like, right now he's been married for I don't know how many years now, and he has like 6 or 7 kids, and that's an all good family. But at the time he was dating somebody who was had a lot of problems. I don't even pretend to know what they all were, but very, very low IQ was one of them. And then she got pregnant, kind of guess by accident, and then his parents wouldn't talk to him for 6 months after the child was born. Long story short, I ended up babysitting that child, and then what the court did there was, it was an infant. She was like a month old by the time they get to court. And it's like 1 week with the father and 1 week with the mother for an infant. And the mother was not able to mother or anything like that. So I befriended the mother, though I couldn't stand her. And then she was really irresponsible. So, long story short, I ended up on her weeks of her custody with this infant. I ended up being the one who was taking care of the child all the time because she'd drop her off at my house and she wouldn't come back. And I'd have her the whole week, morning, noon, and night. And then there was a guardian appointed to this, right? And so, I mean, I was always on the phone to the guardian. I was like the witness. But what I knew was, I didn't like my landlord at the time. The young guy didn't like his mother at all. But his family came around 6, 8 months later. And so for 2 years, I was the primary caregiver, too much, but I did a good job for this child, because on the father's weeks when he went to work, drop her off with me. And on the mother's weeks, I'd have her all the time. And so, anyway, eventually I was able to talk just such a stupid ruling that was. But I was able to talk the mother out of, so into signing away her parental rights, is what ended up happening. And then I'm sure she just ran off with another guy and got pregnant again. The idea of someone like that probably cluster B, but also very low IQ, like really functionally not, like what quote a literal moron really means. I'm not trying to call somebody a name, but she was probably looking for someone to love her. And that's the case for a lot of people with BPD, by the way. They're looking for someone to love them, so they want to have a child. It's like all the wrong reasons in the world to have a child. But so I saw that up close and personal, and then things worked out well because it took time, and then he was, like I said, she signed her parental rights away, and I was talking to the guardian. There was just too much mounting evidence because, I mean, I was going to do what was right for the child. And what was right for the child was to be with the father, especially when his family came around. He then had his family support. The kid had cousins, he had lots of siblings and whatnot. And once his parents came back around, and I mean, like I said, he went on, he got married, he has many other children. It's a happy, healthy family. And that child is now, oh my God, that was back in like early 80s. So, yeah. But she's a very healthy adult today, and etc. And I just want to say, when I was looking after that child, and yes, I was still in BPD recovery, that child taught me so much about my screaming inner child, the screaming infant in me. It was quite a learning experience. But I just want to say there, but for the grace of God, go I, not in any like high and mighty way, but that I was able, like, because I was so hurt as a child, I was never going to hurt a child. And I made sure I took exceptional care of this child, knowing how much this child needed what she needed, when she needed it, what she needed, even though it had never been given to me. So I just was, but it helped me. That's something I should talk about, I guess, if I ever do talk about in my recovery, because there were times when and I won't go into it now, but things that happened with her, and when this baby was an infant, and when she would cry, and that the inevitable periods of time when you're looking after a child, you get stressed to the max. And I would just walk into the other room and I wouldn't know what to do. And then I realized that it was okay for her to cry a little. She was in a little rocking thing, and temperature controlled, and I had to sterilize the bottle, the nipples in the bottles, and I had to do all that with the tops of the bottles, and I had to get all that done before I could go and be with her again. And so, but anyway, just one day when she was screaming, and I won't give all the details, but she had the flu, and she had to be given Pedialyte, and it gives kids gas, and she was screaming, and her father was there. And I remember that's what awakened the screaming infant in me. It started to come to my consciousness. Anyway, um, Billy Goat. Oh yes, I read that. And you said Father's Day had men in tears. Well, some women were saying Happy Mother's Day. They wanted to ban Father's Day. Well, see that. What is that but outright abuse? Like, what is that? The quote feminist idea of equality, unquote? I don't think so. It's atrocious. Um, well, Father's Day shouldn't be offensive. I mean, I go past it every year. My father is no longer here, nor if he was here, even though I've recovered, I've changed, I've grown, he'd still be the same person. So I go past Mother's and Father's Day, but I don't do that with regard to friends and other people who are mothers and or fathers. I acknowledge that for my friends, and I think that radical feminism is the only um, yeah, the only place that somebody would say Mother's Day should be celebrated and Father's Day not. That's ridiculous. Father's Day, well, these are all women. I mean, if they think Father's Day is offensive, then they must have been wounded pretty bad by their daddies. And I mean, so was I, but I got over it, got through it. And that's why healing is so important. Richard, they end up splitting and devaluing and more onto new object other. Then the children are exposed to these different partners. Well, yes, and that's also a big concern, and can be very dangerous for children, emotionally, psychologically, and other ways as well. Because again, it's a mother, with BPD, and okay, if she's not treated enough or whatever, she's going to make a bunch of poor decisions, and she'll probably think she's just a victim of her own quote choices, unquote. And Yeah, I'm sorry that you're in that situation because, of course, your concern is for your children, and it just doesn't sound like it's going too well on, decide when she has the kids. Yeah, they're being exposed to a lot, and I guess depending on their ages, the best you can do with that is, just try to be that steady rock in their lives, and or if you think they're really developing any issues themselves, the earlier you can get a child into a child psychotherapist, the better. Just to help them cope and help with their mental health overall. But hopefully, with everything going on, hopefully your children are getting through it because if they're under 7, it's going to be much more harrowing than if they're over 7. So I think that people being wounded in childhood and not healing those wounds, it's not just, well, you see the stats again, I don't know. It used to be that there was a lot of disparity between how many females were sexually abused in childhood versus males, but it doesn't seem like there's as much disparity now, or I don't know if those stats are accurate. But no matter what happens to one in childhood, it's not okay to wreak havoc, not get treatment, and wreak havoc on your own children and alienate their father. It's like these women can't even see. And by the way, this happens to parents in the 25% who are who are the borderline is their adult child, and then when there's children, the as well as the often men, and sometimes the opposite, but getting alienated from children, or even when you're seeing your children, you're worried what's going on in the on the other parent's custody, of course. And then there are so many grandparents, and I'm not equating the two as equal, but so many grandparents of the adult child of BPD's own kids, right? That they get blocked and they get blackmailed emotionally. Like, if you don't do this, if you do that, if you say this again, if you talk to, and they'll often try to alienate their parents from, or a parent from, the husband or ex-husband, or wherever that is at, but they, or boyfriend, and they'll often try to say, well, if you talk to him again, even though he has a stake and interest in his children and loves his children and might get along with the borderlines, parents in the 25%, and then you have all these grandparents who are denied seeing their grandchildren all of a sudden, the same thing. And it's like, and these people, these women, and with BPD and or NPD or comorbidity both, have no thought about what's happening to their own kids in all these different situations where they're just trying to. The kids become object other to them in a way because they become like possessions, right? And then it's all about them, and they don't know how to take care of their many of them, most of them, if untreated, don't know how to take care of their children's needs. And that's where being, the first degree relative of a borderline is perilous for children. It's not in the genetics, it's in the replication of the unmet needs and or abuse and chaos and all the rest of it too. So, and again, when this happens for men, and even like for Richard, when you have a custody arrangement and everything, it's really hard if there's something you want to bring back to address that's going on that is really hurting your children. And often there are some men that can get sole custody, but that's very rare. And that's probably what needs to happen more often than not, or at least until the children are older, or at least until this person goes and gets actual substantial treatment. So there's a lot going on here, and I'm not saying it just goes on for men with women, or cluster B women, or women in general, sometimes, some women, but that's the most unaddressed reality of all this. And yet, there's a lot of males online. I've seen several, like, small channels recently, more men getting online who are the exes of women with BPD, and maybe it doesn't always involve children, but they're talking about their experiences. And I've seen, like, there's just from memory, I don't mean to single people out this way, but an Asian man and just a few men I've seen or come across the videos recently. They might have just got online like a month or two ago, and they have really small channels, and they're really talking about their own experiences, and it's heartbreaking to listen to, as it would be heartbreaking to listen to a woman who had a male BPD partner or narcissistic partner. And I think that this is what's wrong with the fifth wave of radical feminism for sure, and that there aren't the resources for men. There just aren't. And I know too. Let me just say, these women shelters and sexual assault centers, sexual assault abuse centers, or whatever. So there's a lot of women that go there that have been assaulted, domestic violence. Okay, well, that's good. They're there. Women have those resources, but there's a lot of women who go there and abuse those resources. And I know, because I know people that work in them, and I interfaced with one before as a client many years ago. They are radical in those places. Women, it's all staffed by women, and they are radicalized women more often than not. So that doesn't help the whole situation either. Because sometimes it is a man has really, abused a woman, and they really need those services. And sometimes it's a cluster B, and it's not all so very true. Not that some people with cluster B can't be, still victims of domestic violence, but they often lie about it. Ability goat. It's difficult with kids. The schools are teaching postmodern ideas. I know everything is devolving in that regard. And then you said, I'm one of the rare fathers who have full custody, and well, good for you. And the school tried to say I was being unreasonable for a time. They couldn't grasp the abuse. I'm sure you mean of, yes, your child's mother. And you said I phoned child services twice, and they didn't want to know. Well, there's a lot wrong in those systems too. And you said phone a men's helpline, and it was a woman who answered who just so happened to have the same name as my ex. Oh, well, I hope she heard you, though. That would be the key thing, right? And interesting that you phone a men's helpline and a woman answers. I mean, maybe it would be helpful to have some guys in those places too. I don't know. But then I find a lot of men work with me for many different reasons, but um, I think for a lot of men, when they have inner child woundedness from their own childhoods, they find it helpful to work with a woman. Maybe many men don't, but many men do. And of course, I'm not the only woman that men work with, so it's hard to say. I don't have it. I don't pretend to have any stats on this stuff because I don't believe in stats. But I just hope that when you phone that men's helpline, that the woman at least was listening and hearing you. Because I guess it's difficult. I know that I've talked about this before, and I can get a lot of women get really pissed off at me. Um, I'm sure cluster B women, but not necessarily only cluster B women, because I'm not here to say that men deserve special status, but I am here to say that the fifth wave of radical feminism is beyond ridiculous. And from what I've read and heard from a few sources, like in my life, that they aren't in my life, but somebody I know knows them, kind of thing. They really have an agenda, at least some of these radical fifth wave feminists, to create a matriarchy. And like, that's not about anything, quote, equal or coming together across the genders. That's about them wanting to subjugate men, and worse, and like maybe women were at a time in history, or many women were in some way. I don't know, but certainly I wouldn't think that's the case today. Billy the Goat, not really helped, just listened, but at least she wasn't gaslighting me. Well, yeah, and I mean, you'd think somebody would. It's too bad she couldn't be really helpful, but if she can at least listen and hear you, that's what's important. Because on a men's hotline, just by the very nature of the name of it, aren't you supposed to hear and listen to men? And that's the thing. Like there aren't many resources out there for men at all. But I guess I just really can't believe how many people in general can't just respect people's choices, whether it's men going their own way or whatever else. And how many men react to that, and why do they react to it? Why do they think that MGTOW and Red Pill and men and other men's rights movements are, quote, weak, unquote? Why do they think that? What is it threatening about their masculinity? And how much of that is from their childhood woundedness, those critical men of MGTOW and Red Pill men? What's going on with that? I have to ask, and I'm asking a rhetorical question here, but it really makes me wonder because it doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, and I can be as supportive of a woman, like a female client as a male client, but I must say it's not the same working with a man as it is with a woman, nor should it be. But I just can't tell you how many men I have worked with over the years and in recent years that just feel so, and many of them are millennial men, and they feel so lost, and they're not sure what they're supposed to, quote, be or do anymore in terms of relating to women. So, if anything, it suggests that the fifth wave of feminism has toppled something in a lot of people's lives that is only inverting what women claim to be the problem in the first place. But now they're trying to inflict this problem on men so that, it's like an overcompensatory thing from hell, I think. And Billy Goat, he said, but when I called for mediation, the lady kind of understood what was going on. I guess she was familiar with these kind of cases. Well, that's a positive thing. Yes, because mediation, I mean, that's another link in a system of many things, right? That gotta really hope for open minded, educated, level headed mediators, because otherwise, mediation is, obviously very difficult. And all these different steps and all these different processes, so much, unfortunately, for so many, does go so wrong. And often it's goes against men. I'm not saying that doesn't mean that some women don't find the same thing on the other side, but again, I don't have, over the years even, not many female clients in the position of so many male clients. So that's kind of educative in its own way as well. But I know it's a little bit of a polarizing, I guess, topic, isn't it? And yet that's a sad thing because I believe that there's room for everybody, and I think that everybody should be seen for who they are. Not anybody who's being abusive, obviously, but yeah, we need to get more personal. People need to develop more attuned and toned and mindful personal philosophy. But then we have to try to work at bringing back some civility to society because it really kind of just isn't there. I mean, not saying there isn't civility in a lot of people, but it's not a core value of society anymore. I mean, and in the world we live today, it's probably pretty obvious why that is. But I think that's something that is not serving anybody, and it's not serving humanity as a whole. And yeah, can't sing kumbaya on it, but we all are part of the human condition, and we all are equal, each individuals that matter. Except I would just delineate those who are abusive as being not that they don't matter, but that they need to get a lot of help and they need to stop abusing, obviously. But civility is kind of dead, and that's a big problem. So, where society, at least, a few decades ago, still had some moral compass, which doesn't have to be affiliated with religion, but some moral compass, ethics, civility, and those kind of core beliefs that worked in society, that weren't just in one individual or the next, or lots, but not a lot. And I think that that's one of the problems today in a postmodernist world that is, well, it's a tearing down situation. It's deconstructivism, or maybe not even that formally, but it's devolving. Well, that's interesting, Billy the Goat. You said love is dying. Well, yes, I think that's very whew, it was jarring there for a minute to read that, but it's also very appropriate and very unfortunately right on because without civility and with so much abuse and without people taking personal responsibility, like I happen to look at, psychology is about the individual, right? So you look at individuals, and then sociology looks at the collective. And really what seems to happen is the breakdown in individual lives then creates this dominating sort of devolving breakdown societally. I don't think it's the other way around, actually. And so love, no doubt, is dying under the weight of not just cluster B, but all things abuse and the fact that when I started this live stream, no offense to the commenter, but the first comment was I wasn't being very politically correct. And is that what we're here for? Is to be politically correct? Or are we here to talk about truth? Painful truth. That, I'm not here to be one. I mean, today's topic, okay. But I mean, on my channel in general, I'm not just going to be one sided, or I'm not, I'm very much for men, but I'm for women too. But I'm not for the women that are abusing the men, and I'm not for the men abusing the women. But so yeah, love is dying is a really, I was going to say bold statement, but I think sadly just a really accurate one. And then Billy Go said the school teaching, quote, sharing is caring, unquote, that love is bought, a transaction. Well, yes, and I mean that would be the, it's the predominant forces in society in the world today that are narcopathic, right? So malignant, narcissist, psychopathic, narcopathic, and they are really I mean, school curriculums have changed so much. History books have been facts have been rewritten and or what was a fact in the first place, but what kids are learning today is serving them even less well than what I learned as a kid, which wasn't serving me all that well either. Because I realize now that most of the things I learned in public school or high school were, largely, not always, but they were based on lies about history. So, and then to promote in schools sharing is caring. And I think social media also supports this erroneous idea, this inculcating, I don't know, unreality that they're trying to make reality for kids is, and for others, that, love is bought in a transaction because that speaks to, the way narcissistic personality disorder people, they transact with people. And so in narcissistic culture, because the world is driven by and controlled by narcopaths. So why wouldn't they want their lack of everything, for lack of a better way to put it, being extolled as what children should learn in school? It's all upside down now, The world is kind of shifted upside down. And that, I think, should be a teacher to more of us than not of how much we need to take care of ourselves but respect each other and come together in whatever way we can with people, in meaningful and accepting ways across differences, because you know if my big deal today was being politically incorrect, well, I think I'll rather wear that as a badge of honor, because political correctness, I used to be a liberal, but I don't even believe in the politics of the theater of the absurd anymore. But the bottom line is, it's political correctness is cultural Marxism, and it's seeking to take away freedom of speech. It's seeking to take away individuality, and I have a problem with that. So interesting that was, and I'm not picking on the commenter, just saying interesting. It was the first comment in this live stream, so it just goes to show. And you know what we need and what people need to think about in your own life, and whether it's you're advocating for your child, you're advocating for yourself, you're advocating for a loved one or family member or a friend or a stranger, is that we all need to be accepting, not of abuse or abusive people, but respectful to each other, and hopefully to create, like, we don't even know how fast this world is spinning out of control right now. But with that, or even not without that, not that notwithstanding, it's a time to really, for each person to take whatever healing journey they still need to take, and to embrace it fully, and to get one's house in order, and then to be able to accept people who are respectful, but maybe it's a gender difference, maybe it's this whole idea of MGTOW versus whatever WGTOW is, or women's reaction to MGTOW, etc. When Why can't we just respect each other and the human context of people's experience, and that people have a right to make choices in their lives as long as they're not hurting anybody else? And that's really important, because we are on a macrocosm level right now losing all kinds of, we've lost freedom. We've lost freedoms, and we're not going to get them back. And so we need to have between us, in any interactions that we can have, respect and respecting differences. And I'm fine, if people don't agree with me, or to disagree respectfully and civilly. There's nothing wrong with that. And I fully well know that talking about this, which I'm coming from my heart, and this is authentic, how much I care about what's happening to men. And I respect any man that is MGTOW or Red Pill or any other men's rights movement or philosophy. And I will take each man as an individual person, not to diminish one's manhood or masculinity. And I'll take every woman as a person as well. And trying to be as respectful as possible. And I mean, in life, are we going to get along with everybody? Well, no, absolutely not. But I think we have to try the best that we can. Sometimes we just can't help what happens. Or even if we have some responsibility in a breakdown in communication. But online, it's a different thing. It's a funnier thing. It's not funny, haha. It's a more tragic thing. And Billy goes, I wish it could be so, but from what's being seen, sadly, it's the path of destruction. Well, yes, it is. And I think that all any of us can do is our own individual part. Me as a YouTuber, I try to speak up wherever I can, against things that could be, that I believe are more divisive and destructive than helpful. But it's up to every person, especially on YouTube, for example, to decide who they're going to watch. And they might agree or really resonate with somebody who, I might not, and whatever. But again, we just have to respect differences. And remember that we can't, even if we think there's a reason to, can't stop people from listening to whoever they want, can't try to protect them from something that you think might harm them, or not, because everybody's got their own opinions. And then you said there's a manhunt to make false claims for rape, sexual harassment, for the victim card. Well, I'm sure in a lot of instances that's true. And then I think, some of the more, some of the things like that are going on in Hollywood and whatever's been going on there, I think it's there's probably been rampant abuse, but it probably doesn't just go one way. And the thing is, Hollywood is not regular life, for one thing. And there are people that are really truly being victimized or have been victimized. But then, yeah, there's a lot of people that pull up victim cards that aren't authentic, or they've been victimized, but they will not take personal responsibility for healing and recovery, so that they no longer have to remain a victim. And there's just too much victim mindset in this world today, I think. There's enough to choke a horse, actually. And that would kind of lead into the empath narrative of special invoked status of victimization, which to this day beats me. But anyway, and I think too that when dealing with people, interacting with people online, or dealing with people in life, or like when I work with clients, it's really important to not black and white think. Like a lot of, not just YouTubers, but people on social media do that. And hey, I just try my best not to do that, because I think it's important to I hear what you're saying, Billy the Goat. You know what I'm saying, probably old school values, right? And I can't make anybody take on what I believe would help a lot, help all of us out, because everybody's an individual in that regard too. But the more we're losing freedom, and the more that the world is on a path of destruction, one can only hope that that will matter to more people than maybe not, and that that might bring about some kind of opening to more civility. And when I say that, I realize I'm probably quote preaching a kumbaya moment that maybe isn't possible anymore, for a lot of people. So I well understand that, but just aware of the time. And thank you so much to everyone who's been here and contributed and what you've shared. And Billy the Goat, I really appreciate your sharing and your willingness to talk about this and share your experience. And yeah, it's very valuable, and hopefully it will be to people who want to watch it back, because again, I'm a woman who gets it. And it doesn't mean that I don't see women's pain or women's hurt in the cases where that's the case for women. But I definitely see men hanging out there with few resources, left to dry by so many cluster B women, and maybe just sometimes other women in general. And not that some men are abusive to some women. I mean, it's not a black and white all or nothing proposition. Just the focus here was more on how men are traumatized by a lot of women, and specifically cluster B women, but maybe not all trauma from women today for some men comes from a cluster B woman. And then, of course, women are traumatized too, but that wasn't the focus today. Um, and you said there are groups of women who will also sabotage their sisters. Oh, definitely. Definitely. And it's a good thing I have no contact from my family of origin, because I have one of them in that family of origin. There's a PhD in women's studies. Yeah, one of those fifth wave feminist type peoples. And you said, thank you so much, AJ and folks. This is very helpful to the MGTOW community. Well, I'm glad. And if you think other MGTOW men would benefit from this, Billy the Goat, I hope you'll share it. And my message is clearly what I've stated here, but also that I am out here for any man who happens to be MGTOW, red pill, etc., who's been or needs some help in recovery with any cluster B woman or anything that happened as a result of the abuse of a woman. And that's not the whole reason I'm talking about this at all. But if you think it would benefit anybody, please do share it, because there's a lot of men online in different areas that are really criticizing MGTOW and red pill men, as if somehow you are all emasculated and weak and blah blah blah, which is just asinine in my humble opinion. Um, Billy go, great. I was about to ask you if you'd mind me sharing. No, absolutely. Please do share. Share as much as you can, as widely as you can, for MGTOW and red pill men. And also, I've been posting my videos up to some Facebook pages I have now too, because I don't like Facebook, but so I try to disseminate it out there a little bit anyways if somebody's watching. But yeah, absolutely share it. And so with that, I better get going so it doesn't get longer and longer. And I hope to do more on this, and I hope that maybe more MGTOW men will join in, because in the past there's been. I'm gonna look up some of those old live streams and take snippets, because there's a reason a lot of live streams aren't up, but live streams are going to be staying up. But some of them got way too long. Some of them were just too like topics all over the place. And so really I have this goal now where I'm going to live stream more, but I was going to live stream shorter. This one went on longer, but I think it was really well worth it, and a really important topic and subject, and more than that, in a lot of lives of men for sure. And I really wanted to acknowledge that. And so yeah, I'm going to look back. So the reason a lot of live streams aren't up, not because, like the trolls say, I have something to hide, but because a lot of them just were bouncy all over the place. And so I'm going to, when I get time, be going through those to see what I can maybe edit pieces out of 4 or 6 hours that would really help people out. So, but this one stays as is, and please do feel free to share. And thank you for everybody that came by. And many more people were listening than participating, as is often the case, but hopefully it was beneficial to them. So yeah, just to say, no offense to the commenter, but the first thing they said to me was, "Hey, you're not sounding PC," and I think that's just a really it's not an unexpected comment in the world in which we live today. So if people don't know what cultural Marxism really means, that'd be something to look into, because political correctness is cultural Marxism, and equality. See, fairness and equality, and some other words like that, they are concepts that people try to shove into quote reality unquote that you can't. Justice versus injustice. These are things that we have to approach as the philosophical constructs that they are, because they don't really have what the words mean. They don't have the representation in objective reality that we would hope they would have. So, with that, everybody take care, and I look forward to live streaming more. And maybe I'll even pick a day and a time. Ooh, wouldn't that be shocking? So, everybody take care. It's been a pleasure. And this is a very, very important topic. Men are people too. Men hurt. Men can be vulnerable. There's nothing emasculating. Men are very masculine when they're traumatized by cluster B women or otherwise traumatized, when they have had really awful experiences in their lives. Men hurt, men feel, men matter, and fathers matter in children's lives. And radical fifth wave feminism is crazy. That's my assertion. So with that, I bid everybody adieu and a good day, and I look forward to live streaming on topics that are perhaps not as polarizing as this one, but whatever is polarizing, I feel a need to go after, because I hope that people can see themselves represented, and that can matter and help people, and I hope other people might be able to think about it some more and open up their minds to realize, especially women, there's nothing to lose of your personhood and yourself as a woman if you can see what men are talking about and what's happening to men. It doesn't diminish a woman in any way. In fact, I think it adds to who each person is when they can see what's happening to, in this case, the opposite gender, or what's happening versus gay, straight, what's happening versus all the different iterations of differences that in cultural Marxism, political correctness, become divide and conquers unnecessarily. And remember, people, when you allow yourself to embrace the ideology of anybody's divide and conquer, you are being controlled. You are not a free thinker. You are not a critical thinker. And it's going to come back to bite you too, because we're all losing freedom in this world. Um, Stinos, if I said that right, you're very welcome. You've been binge watching my videos recently, very insightful. Well, I'm glad they're helpful. And hey, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do. This channel needs some support. So, everybody take care. Whoops, I just got to find the button now.